In one Boston hospital room, a woman is timing her contractions alone, while her husband comforts another woman across the building. He thinks she is abandoned, vulnerable, and easy to replace. What he does not know is that the wife he ignored is the anonymous force behind the fortune, the property, and the power beneath his own life. By dawn, the man who chose betrayal over loyalty is about to learn how expensive misjudgment can be.
She was in labor, alone, timing another contraction in a private suite at a Seattle medical center. She glanced at the clock on her tablet while her husband, Liam, swore over the phone he was pinned down by a last-minute crisis with a wealthy art collector. He wasn't in a crisis. He was uncorking a bottle of champagne in a waterfront condo, handing a glass to another woman, an ambitious artist whose career-making sale apparently required a waterfront view and the complete devotion of a man who had ignored his pregnant wife's last 3 messages. And when he finally saw her name flash on his screen, he looked at the woman on the couch beside him and silenced the call. Instead of offering a single word of comfort, he sent a text that would change everything. Sasha needs this win. He put his protege's celebration before his wife's labor, leaving her to bring their child into the world alone while he played the role of devoted mentor. All the while, nurses bustled efficiently in the hallway, and his own mother Diana video called him, catching a glimpse of the expensive artwork in the background and praising him for being so dedicated. But none of them knew the whole story. Not the charismatic gallery director, not the up-and-coming artist, not the proud mother-in-law. The woman they were all dismissing, the one breathing steadily in that quiet room, said nothing. She was the anonymous founder of the logistics firm that had quietly financed his entire gallery. She was a silent shadow powerhouse in the tech world, and she was about to make a single calm call to her head of operations that would sever the very infrastructure of his life, the gallery, the condo, and the fantasy of success he thought he had earned. What she did next left him so utterly ruined, both financially and socially, he couldn't form a sentence, and the subsequent audit of his mistress's work exposed a massive fraud scheme that undid every lie he'd ever constructed. This story proves a fundamental truth: never mistake composure for submission, never confuse a private nature with a lack of influence, and never, ever treat someone's moment of vulnerability as your moment of opportunity. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with, and by the time you find out, it will be the most devastating lesson of your life. If that idea resonates with you, type the word "unseen" in the comments below. Click the like button so this story can reach someone who needs this message. Share it with anyone who has ever been underestimated, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a testament to your own power. Stay with us until the very last second, because the most powerful moment is yet to come. To anyone who has ever been ignored, betrayed, or made to feel invisible by a person you trusted, this story is for you. Today, you will witness why the most unassuming person in any situation is often the one with all the real control, why betrayal has a nasty habit of boomeranging, and why holding your head high in silence is the most powerful response to being wronged. Pay attention to every detail, because each one contains a crucial lesson. Tell us in the comments what you took from this and what your next move would have been. Subscribe for more stories that will empower you. No one at the esteemed Rainier Peak Medical Center in Seattle knew, not the chief of surgery, not the hospital administrator, not even the security team monitoring the entrances, that the woman in maternity suite 7, calmly working through her contractions, was the anonymous mastermind behind the AI logistics platform that ran their entire emergency response vehicle network. She was a phantom in their own system, a name buried in a holding company, and she was completely unaware of how her obsession with privacy was about to become the most devastating weapon in her arsenal, not through some grand plan, but because the universe has a wickedly precise sense of justice. Her investment firm had acquired the commercial real estate trust that owned the gallery building almost 500 days ago as a minor portfolio addition. She'd never stepped foot in the gallery, never met the tenants, and had no idea this hospital would be where her child would choose to be born. She also had no idea it was the same night. That her husband of 5 years, the man for whom she had built an entire world to thrive in, would be with his mistress celebrating a fraudulent art sale in a condo that she owned. His artist had her big break, and he was celebrating with her in the most exclusive part of Seattle. The same city, the same network of assets, the same evening. It was as if every piece of this betrayal had been scripted by a cruel and meticulous author. What happens when the most powerful, unseen woman in the city has been played for a fool? What did she do that left him absolutely shattered? When the full weight of her identity came crashing down on him, was there a single piece of his life left to pick up? Viewers, what you've seen is merely the opening scene. The real story, the affair that was plotted for months, the professional fraud that goes far beyond one condo, and the final move that dismantles the man who thought he was untouchable, is about to unfold. This story will do more than entertain. It will show you what true strength looks like after it has been pushed to its absolute limit. Stay until the final word, because that is where the most profound lesson is hiding. Post in the comments what you're thinking right now and subscribe for more stories you won't forget. The contractions were hitting every 4 minutes, but Alara Reed had stopped timing them with anxiety and was now logging them with the cool, analytical precision of a woman who had decided long ago that panic was a waste of processing power. She was in a suite at Rainier Peak Medical Center, the city's crown jewel of medicine, a monument of steel and glass with hushed hallways and the kind of effortless service that came with enormous tech industry donations. She rested her head on the cool glass of the window, with the focused stillness of someone determined to handle their pain alone. Her go-bag sat on a nearby chair. She had packed it herself a month prior, folding each tiny garment with the quiet excitement of a woman who had wanted this child for years. A small, hand-knitted beanie, a worn science fiction novel from her grandfather, and a small, framed photo of her first server cluster, the tangle of wires in a rented garage that had been the start of everything. Her first mentor had told her across a messy workbench years ago, "Everything of value you ever build will come from your mind. That is the only asset." Alara hadn't understood the true scale of that idea until the first company valuation came through. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about algorithms or investment portfolios or the staggering fortune attached to her name. She was thinking about the fact that her husband, Liam, had now ignored 2 of her calls. She was thinking about how the night nurse had been perfectly professional but completely detached. She was thinking about how the silence in the suite felt immense and how, more than anything else, she just wanted to hold his hand, but it wasn't there. She had first tried calling Liam at 7:30 in the evening. The contractions had been manageable then, and she had kept her voice steady and calm. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his tone having that polished, performative sheen she recognized as his client-facing voice, the sound of a man putting on a show for someone who wasn't her. "I'm on my way," he had promised. "This collector is just finalizing the wire transfer. Get checked in, babe. I will be there before you know it." She had believed him because for 5 years she had made the conscious choice to, and because the alternative, the cold suspicion that had been quietly taking root for the past year, was a reality she was not equipped to face while trying to bring their baby into the world. Here is a valuable tip, viewers. A person's real character is shown in how they act when you are at your most vulnerable. Never forget that. It will save you. But Liam was not stuck with a collector. At that exact moment, while Alara was being settled into her maternity suite on the 7th floor, Liam Vance was pouring 2 flutes of champagne in their waterfront condo. He moved with the confident air of a man who believed he was the center of his own universe, handing one of the glasses to a woman named Sasha Cole. Sasha wasn't a demanding client. She was an artist, and she was celebrating. She touched a hand to her chest in a theatrical display of gratitude, her designer dress immaculate, her laughter sharp and triumphant. Every gesture was a part of an elaborate performance of success, and Liam was her adoring director. He led her to the couch with a hand resting possessively at her waist, his expression filled with a kind of pride Ilara hadn't received from him in 9 months of pregnancy. Back in the hospital room, a small notification chimed on Ilara's tablet. Motion detected. Waterfront living room. It was the private security feed she'd coded herself. He had not mentioned going to the condo. Ilara was beginning to realize with a sickening lurch, specifically said he was at the gallery across town. Her hospital suite was luxurious, with a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. The nurse had cheerfully called it their very best room. Ilara had just gotten comfortable, trying to breathe through the building pressure. She was pulling the soft hospital blanket over her legs, her phone in one hand, about to try calling Liam again, when the security alert caught her eye. He was supposed to be at work, but he wasn't alone. A contraction seized her then, a powerful, overwhelming wave of pain that erased all thought, leaving only a searing physical truth. When the feeling subsided and her vision returned to the tablet screen, she saw her husband, Liam, standing in the living room with his mistress, Sasha, clinging to his arm as he leaned in to kiss her. From a darkened corner, his mother, Eleanor, materialized. She had been so motionless, Olivia hadn't even registered her presence. Eleanor adjusted the collar of her wool blazer, her expression a perfect portrait of detached observation. The look she exchanged with her son was an entire silent negotiation, over in a heartbeat. Liam moved to Olivia's bedside. He didn't inquire about her pain. There was no trace of remorse, no whisper of an apology, none of the simple compassion the situation called for. He regarded her the way a gallery owner might eye a painting he was about to deaccession, a thing to be managed, efficiently and without sentiment. His voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper aimed at Olivia and his mother. Anya is suffering from a terrible ocular migraine. The lights are too much for her. She needs to rest. You can take the armchair. Olivia could only stare back, the words stolen from her lungs. A new wave of pain was building low in her spine, a distant tremor gathering force. In the fleeting quiet before it crashed over her, she looked at the man she had built a life with, the father of the child she was about to bring into the world, and understood with a cold, shocking certainty that her faith in him had been a masterpiece of self-deception. She didn't move with the speed he expected. Liam leaned across her, his hand closing on the metal frame of the hospital bed, and with a single smooth push, he altered its position. He tilted it away from his wife, creating a clear line of sight to Anya. The gesture was both public and profoundly cruel, a declaration to the entire ward. He had just displaced his wife, mid-labor, from her own bed to soothe his lover's supposed sensitivity to light. At the nursing station less than 5 feet away, a woman named Maria Sanchez went utterly still. At 35 years old, with 12 years in labor and delivery under her scrubs, Maria stood behind the counter, watching the drama unfold with the stunned paralysis of someone seeing a disaster they were helpless to stop. She knew she could not interfere. She raised her travel mug of tea to her lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, the only resistance she could offer. Across the hall, another patient slowly lowered her book, her eyes wide. The overhead fluorescent lights suddenly felt more like interrogation lamps, determined to sear the memory of this quiet humiliation onto every witness. And Eleanor, watching her daughter-in-law grip the windowsill as the contraction crested, watching her fold in on herself with a strangled sound of pain that no one should ever have to make alone, raised a hand to her mouth, not to gasp in shock, but to conceal a smile. It was a small, disciplined flicker of amusement, a sliver of cruelty made all the more vicious for its quiet satisfaction. The suppressed sound hit Olivia harder than a scream ever could. When people reveal their true nature in a crisis, my friends, when they find private joy in your suffering or treat your greatest moment of need as a personal inconvenience, you are obligated to believe them. Not later, right then. For 4 years, Eleanor had communicated her disapproval of Olivia through a series of expertly aimed comments, the kind of polite, deniable malice that the Boston elite have perfected. The charity gala where she'd glanced at the emerald necklace Olivia wore, saying with a brittle smile, "How bold! Liam always did appreciate a bit of theatricality." The curated family photos on the mahogany mantel of their Beacon Hill home, where Olivia was perpetually positioned just behind someone's shoulder, slightly out of frame, an afterthought in her own life. The way Eleanor would praise Anya Reyes at gallery openings long before Olivia knew her as anything more than a name on a canvas. Such a provocative artist. She truly understands the kind of vision a man of Liam's stature needs to cultivate. It was the clear enthusiasm of a mother who had already chosen her son's second wife and was just waiting for the first to be discarded. Olivia had never once pushed back, not out of meekness, but from a guiding philosophy inherited from her grandmother, along with the sterling endowment. The ultimate advantage you hold over people who misjudge you is to allow their delusion to continue, right up until the second it becomes a liability. 4 seconds after Eleanor smiled, Olivia concluded that that second had finally come. As the pain receded, Olivia straightened up. She released her grip on the windowsill, turned and locked eyes with Eleanor. Her gaze, which had been hazy with agony moments before, was now sharp and terrifyingly lucid. She reached for her overnight tote, retrieved her phone, and scrolled to a contact saved not with a name, but with an icon, a single silver key. She pressed the call button. The phone barely rang twice before a man's voice came on the line, a voice that was clearly not that of an underling. It was the voice of a man who never needed to be told anything twice. His name was Julian Croft. He was 63 years old, and for the last 22 of them, he had served as the sole architect of the Sterling family's immense wealth, managing its complex affairs with the quiet authority of a man who moves empires. Olivia said only 5 words. "Julian, I'm at St. Catherine's." A short pause followed, not of confusion, but of a formidable intellect instantly rerunning a decade-long calculation with a sudden new directive. Then Julian answered, his tone as calm and steady as if he'd been expecting this call his entire career. "I understand. I will be there in 15 minutes. In the back of a black sedan gliding through the city, Julian's junior analyst, Ben, who was only 6 months out of business school, glanced up from a spreadsheet. Julian had already ended the call and was shrugging on his coat. "Divert the car," Julian instructed the driver. "We're headed to St. Catherine's maternity." Ben looked bewildered. "Sir, it's nearly midnight. What's at St. Catherine's?" Julian fastened his cufflink, opened the car door, and said one word: "The contingency." Olivia ended the call and placed the phone back in her tote. She sat down in the armchair, the one her husband had exiled her to so his mistress could occupy her bed. She clasped her hands in her lap, emanating the profound calm of someone who has just lit an exceptionally long fuse and is now content to wait for the detonation. Liam was completely oblivious. He was busy arranging a pillow behind Anya's neck, murmuring to her, his hand resting proprietarily on the bed's metal railing. It was as if he had either entirely forgotten or simply decided it was irrelevant that his wife was less than 4 feet away, in the process of giving birth to his heir. Eleanor had reclaimed her chair in the corner. She'd pulled a small silver mirror from her handbag and was methodically touching up her lipstick, her concentration absolute, as though preparing for an entrance at the symphony rather than witnessing a birth. Her eyes met Olivia's in the tiny reflection for a split second, and the look she sent was not just spiteful, it was something worse. It was dismissal. 15 minutes. Olivia breathed through the following contraction alone, a hand pressed to the cold window pane, her eyes fixed on the glittering tapestry of the city below. She was patient. The shift in the ward's atmosphere began at precisely 14 minutes and 50 seconds after she made her call. It started small, like the air changing before a thunderstorm. It was the sound of purpose, of people who were accustomed to giving orders moving through a space and forcing everyone else to adjust to a new center of power. Olivia heard them before she saw them, the crisp, decisive sound of expensive leather shoes on sterile tile, and a quiet, urgent exchange of words that were clearly commands, not requests. The unmistakable sound of a door being pushed open with a weight that hospital doors are not meant to have. Then Julian Croft entered the room. He was accompanied by one other person, a woman in a severe charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase, whose hospital identification badge was a deep platinum color, a designation Olivia had never seen before tonight. It was the kind of badge that made locks obsolete. Julian was 63, and he looked it, with his thatch of white hair and unassuming glasses, the type of man you'd trust with your retirement fund. But he moved across that floor with the serene confidence of a person who had just decided to gently remind the world that his client, in fact, was the primary benefactor of the entire hospital wing. He crossed the room in 12 paces and came to a halt directly before Olivia. He took it all in, Olivia relegated to the chair, the hospital bed a few feet away, occupied by a woman performing a pantomime of distress, the man standing protectively beside that bed who was now turning, his face a mask of annoyed confusion at the sudden interruption. Julian's expression, in the span of a single breath, communicated everything that needed to be understood before he had even opened his mouth. He then directed his gaze to the nurse, Maria, the one who had stood by her station, frozen, and he spoke, his voice measured and completely final. Please have the Sterling suite on the penthouse floor prepared for Mrs. Croft immediately with the top obstetrics team. Dr. Alistair Finch is on his way to lead them. The nurse, Maria, didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for clarification. She didn't so much as glance at Liam for confirmation. She just gave a single efficient nod and was gone, moving with a speed that bordered on a run. Liam had now turned fully away from the bed, his hand dropping from the railing. His face went through a rapid series of changes, first confusion, then indignation, and finally, the first shadow of a dawning terrible understanding. Then came that specific wave of indignation a man feels when his authority is undermined in a place he considers his own territory. He fell back on the persona that never failed him, the one he used in hostile takeovers and at tense family dinners to put everyone back in line. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit. "I'm sorry," he said, aiming the words at Alistair like polished steel darts. His voice was sharp, deliberate, and carried the implicit threat of consequences. "Who in the hell are you, and what gives you the right to give directions to the staff at my own charity gala?" Alistair looked at Julian Croft with the weary, almost pained patience of someone watching another man swagger toward a cliff edge he hasn't bothered to notice. "My name is Alistair Finch," he said, his voice level. "I am the managing director of the Vance Family Trust, which, as of 18 months ago, acquired the controlling interest in Croft Capital and all its associated assets." He let that statement settle in the silent air. "Mrs. Elena Croft," he added, "is the trust's sole principal and signatory." The opulent ballroom fell into a dead, shocked quiet. Ben, a young intern standing near the entrance, clutching his boss's portfolio, watched the entire exchange with his mouth hanging slightly open. He glanced over at Maria, the event coordinator, who had stopped by the champagne tower on her way out. She picked up a flute of sparkling water, took a long, deliberate sip, the kind of sip you take when you've just witnessed the most satisfying corporate implosion of your life and you want to savor the moment. Julian's perfect, confident facade didn't crack all at once. It held for a beat, a bizarre, slow-motion decay. It was like watching a skyscraper whose foundations have been dynamited, holding its shape for a few seconds out of pure muscle memory before the inevitable, catastrophic collapse. Eleanor Croft had snapped her diamond clutch shut. Sophia had stopped her performance of the wide-eyed, grateful artist, and Elena, from her table in a quiet corner, looked at her husband for a long, steady moment. She looked at the man who had relegated her to a seat in the back, who had put his mistress on a pedestal at his own gala, who had been married to her for 5 years, and had never once taken the time to see the woman who existed beyond his own reflection. And then she spoke, her voice low but piercingly clear. "Alistair, please ensure Miss Rossi's photographs are removed from the auction before the doors open to the public. She was being showcased for her unique perspective." She stood, arranging the drape of her silk evening gown over her pregnant belly, and picked up her small personal bag. "Julian," she said as she began walking toward the exit, with Alistair and his team forming a subtle phalanx around her, "your mother just referred to my family's legacy as a charming little real estate venture." She didn't say it with heat, but with the cold finality of someone dictating a memo for the permanent record. "Make sure you remember she said that," she added, "because I certainly will." And with that, she walked out of the gala, out of the shadows, out of the corner he had put her in, and out of the diminished role she had been quietly playing for 5 excruciatingly long years. She never looked back. The private elevator doors whispered open at the penthouse level, and Elena stepped into a space so profoundly different from the glittering chaos she'd just left that it felt like crossing into another reality, separated not just by 60 floors, but by the immense, soul-crushing distance between who she had been made to feel she was and who she had always been. The Vance family's private suite atop their flagship building had been designed by the architect who restored the private wings of the Louvre. The floors were antique French oak, the lighting was subtle and warm, and the air carried the clean, faint aroma of sandalwood from an environmental system that cost more than most hedge funds manage in a year. On a marble credenza, there were fresh peonies. A cloud of blush pink blossoms in a crystal vase replaced every 36 hours regardless of whether anyone was there to see them. Elena had been paying for those flowers without ever knowing they existed. Dr. Anya Sharma was already waiting by the entrance. At 58, she was the most revered private obstetrician in New York, a woman who had built a dynasty over 3 decades by delivering the heirs of the city's titans with a calm, decisive competence that money could buy access to, but never replicate. She had received Alistair's text 10 minutes ago. She was already in the building, attending the gala as a donor, and had ascended with the silent efficiency of a woman who understood that certain calls demanded her presence, not her questions. She took one look at Elena, at the deep exhaustion etched around her eyes, the careful way she moved, the overnight bag she carried as a sad symbol of how completely she'd been abandoned, and she didn't say a word about the drama below. She simply placed a reassuring hand on Elena's arm and said, "You are where you need to be. From this moment forward, you have nothing to worry about." It was 16 words, but they were the first 16 words spoken to Elena all evening that were entirely for her benefit, with no ulterior motive, no posturing, and none of the suffocating weight of another person's ego. Elena felt them land in a part of her soul that had felt vacant for years. She gave a single nod and let the doctor lead her into the suite. The lounge was breathtaking. a vast private retreat with a single floor-to-ceiling window that presented the entire Manhattan skyline as a piece of living art. The advanced medical technology was so masterfully concealed within custom walnut cabinetry that the room felt like a five-star hotel, not a state-of-the-art birthing suite. A handcrafted bassinet, lined with impossibly soft cashmere, was waiting next to a deep armchair. Not a plastic visitor's chair, not an afterthought, but a chair placed with the certainty that a mother would need a comfortable place to sit beside her child, that she would want to be near her baby the moment they arrived. Elena set her bag on a small table. She took out a tiny, hand-knitted gray cap. She set it down where she could see it. Then she took out a silver-framed photograph of her grandmother, Clara Vance, the woman who had quietly built a real estate empire, who lived simply despite her immense wealth, who had told Elena once, leaning across a massive mahogany desk with the distinct gravity of a woman who knew she was running out of time to pass on what truly mattered. "The fortune is the least important part of it, my love. What I am truly giving you is the power that comes with being consistently underestimated. It's a weapon they can never disarm because they will never even see that you are holding it." Elena hadn't truly understood her words back then. She understood them now. She understood them with the searing clarity that only arrives after you survive the exact storm that piece of wisdom was meant to guide you through. 60 floors below, the ballroom had become the setting for a very different kind of spectacle. Julian Croft hadn't moved for a full 60 seconds. After Elena had gone, he just stood there in the center of his gala, beside the display he had erected for his mistress, in front of the bar where Maria, the event coordinator, was now meticulously arranging cocktail napkins, refusing to meet his gaze. The spotlights that had made the photography look so important now seemed harsh and accusatory. His wife owned his company, not as an investor, not as a passive beneficiary. She owned it all. The building he was standing in, the very floor beneath his feet, the multi-billion-dollar fund he had used to build his entire identity. It was all Elena's. It had been Elena's for a year and a half, all while he carried on his affair with the supreme arrogance of a man who believed his wife was too sweet, too naive, and far too dependent on his world to ever dare disrupt it. The realization didn't slowly dawn on him. It hit him like a seismic shockwave. It was a complete and total demolition of his reality, a series of tiny hairline cracks he'd ignored suddenly giving way to a spectacular implosion, revealing the truth of what and who had been quietly holding his entire universe in place. He turned to Eleanor. His mother was sitting perfectly, rigidly still. Her clutch was in her lap. Her crimson lipstick was perfect, but her face, the one that had observed Elena's quiet discomfort with a cool, dismissive amusement, the one that had for years subtly edged Elena to the side in family portraits, had changed into something Julian had never witnessed in his 51 years on Earth. Eleanor Croft, a woman who had never been in a room she did not dominate, looked, for the very first time in her life, like someone who had just made a terminal and irrevocable error in judgment. "You knew?" Julian asked. It wasn't an angry accusation. It was the hollow, breathless question of a man standing in the rubble of a life he thought was his own creation. Eleanor Croft said absolutely nothing. Sophia, who had been lingering awkwardly by her photography display as her audience and her future dissolved, finally slipped off her stool and grabbed her coat. Her artistic temperament had apparently evaporated. "I should probably get going," she said to the room at large. "Yes," Maria called from the bar, still not looking up from her work. "You probably should." Now, up on the 62nd floor, in the Vance family's private penthouse wing, Elena breathed through another contraction with Alistair, her family's most trusted advisor, coordinating everything nearby. She wasn't in a sterile hospital room, not in an uncomfortable chair, and she was not alone. As the pressure subsided, she looked out at the New York skyline, a city of steel and light that her own grandmother had helped to shape. She thought of that woman's unshakable power, the kind of strength that never needed to be announced because it was forged into the very bedrock all around them. Leo knocked softly before entering the birthing suite. He was holding a tablet, its screen glowing with a single proposal in a secured digital vault, the kind of document that, once signed, would trigger a cascade of unstoppable change. He set it down on the table beside her designer hospital bag. "The new board is on standby for your final approval," Leo said, his voice a calm anchor. "Whenever you're ready." Maya glanced at the screen. It was the founding charter for her new venture capital fund, the Lighthouse Initiative, a project she had poured her soul into, dedicating a massive portion of her tech fortune to funding female-led startups. The fund would specifically seek out founders in overlooked markets, women who were told their ideas were too niche or too ambitious because male-dominated boards couldn't see the vision. This wasn't a decision born from bitterness, but from a sudden, diamond-hard clarity, the kind that only comes after seeing the very system you want to dismantle up close. She signed it, her full name, Maya Sterling, with the unwavering hand of a woman who wasn't just ending a chapter, but writing an entirely new book. When you finally break away from a relationship that was quietly dimming your light, my friends, or a career that felt like a cage, or a friendship that only ever took from you, the true test isn't the act of leaving. It's in not looking back when the very person who shattered your world swears they can't go on without you. Protect your peace. It is the most valuable company you will ever build. For a while, the suite was a haven of tranquility. Everything felt right. Maya was safe, her daughter was coming, and the insult of that hidden blueprint was a fading scar. But 30 minutes into that quiet, Leo's phone vibrated with a notification that splintered the peace like a stress fracture in glass. Catherine Sterling had not been sitting by the phone while her son Ethan was playing the concerned husband in the hospital lobby. Catherine had made a call, not to family, but to Gideon Croft, the Sterling family's notoriously predatory corporate attorney. Croft was a shark who had been on a massive retainer for 2 decades and knew, with chilling instinct, that the best time to attack is the moment your adversary believes they have finally won. Not even an hour after Maya had settled into the suite, Croft had appeared at the San Francisco courthouse with an emergency injunction. It was a motion for immediate paternal financial guardianship, alleging that Maya was, and this was the exact phrasing, emotionally compromised and engaging in impulsive, financially unsound ventures. He was petitioning for a court-appointed trustee to take control of the newborn's inheritance from the moment of birth. The motion was supported by a sworn affidavit from Catherine, claiming Maya was trying to liquidate marital assets into personal vanity projects, thus proving she was an unfit financial guardian for her own daughter. Leo explained the situation to Maya between her contractions. She was mid-exhale, mid-focus, in the very center of the most primal physical journey of her life, when she learned a legal team was attempting to declare her incompetent. The calm shattered, the sense of empowerment vanished. A narcissist never accepts defeat, my friends. They just escalate the war. The second you build a boundary, you have to expect them and their allies to bring a bulldozer. So be prepared. Have your own team on speed dial, document everything. But Leo hadn't managed Maya Sterling's empire from a garage startup to a billion-dollar exit by being unprepared. He had spent a decade anticipating every possible angle of attack and building firewalls that were invisible until they were needed. Within the hour, Leo had utterly demolished Croft's motion. He produced the airtight prenuptial agreement, which stipulated that all assets from the sale of Maya's company were hers alone, legally shielded from the marriage. The argument of recklessness was baseless. Beyond that, Leo filed a swift counter-motion presenting evidence of Ethan's own financial deceptions with a junior designer at his architectural firm. The evidence included the digital deed for a plot of land in Big Sur and architectural blueprints for a secluded modern home, all co-signed under Ava's name, funded by a secret account. He included encrypted messages and financial transfers that painted a damning picture. The emergency judge threw out Croft's motion in less than an hour after it was filed. It was a complete rout. Leo's assistant, a sharp young lawyer named Sam, who had been racing documents across the city, arrived on the penthouse floor, breathless and with his tie undone. He looked less like an attorney and more like he'd just finished the Beta Breakers race. He placed the final stamped court order on Leo's tablet, let out a massive sigh, and asked, "Is it always this chaotic?" Leo, without looking away from his screen, answered, "This is a slow Tuesday." Maya Sterling's daughter was born at 11:47 p.m. She arrived in a suite on the top floor of a building with a panoramic view of the Golden Gate Bridge, delivered by the most sought-after obstetrician in San Francisco, surrounded by the kind of genuine, unwavering support that gives everything and expects nothing. She was born without a performance, without the hollow presence of people who had not earned a right to be there. When the nurse placed the baby on Maya's chest, still radiating the warmth of her first moments in the world, she looked at her daughter's face and felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in years: completeness. Not the borrowed completeness that comes from molding yourself to fit someone else's life, but the foundational, unshakable completeness of someone who has finally found her own center of gravity. She held her daughter close, feeling her weight, the profound and perfect weight of this tiny person in this very moment, and she made a silent vow. It wasn't spoken aloud because it didn't need words. It just needed to be true. You will never be an afterthought, not for a single second, not as long as I'm alive. Leo came back into the suite just after midnight, carrying a cup of herbal tea he'd sourced from the private kitchen. He also brought the update that the Lighthouse Initiative's first round of funding had already been executed, precisely as Maya had signed off. Maya was nursing her daughter when he entered. She looked up at him. Leo placed the tea on the bedside table with the quiet competence of a man who has spent a decade anticipating needs before they were ever voiced. "He's waiting in the lobby downstairs," Leo said gently. "He's been there for over an hour." Maya looked down at her daughter, at her impossibly small, perfect features. "Leo," she asked, "what did my mentor say? When those venture capitalists told me my entire business model was a fantasy?" Leo paused for a beat. He had been there in that brutal Silicon Valley boardroom all those years ago. The memory was sharp, but the lesson it taught was simple and pure. "He didn't waste time arguing with them, Maya," he said. "He just told you to go build it. He said to let the market prove them wrong." Maya gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Tell him he can come up. But tell him he comes up alone. Not his mother, not a lawyer, just him." Ethan Sterling stepped out of the private elevator onto the penthouse floor at 12:30 in the morning, and the first thing he felt was the atmosphere changing around him. The quiet hum of medical equipment, the original modern art on the walls, the scent of clean linen. It was all a silent judgment. A statement made not in anger, but in serene, untouchable power. Maya was sitting in a plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling window as he came in, their daughter asleep on her chest. The entire San Francisco skyline glittered behind her like a crown she'd earned, not inherited. She didn't acknowledge him immediately. She continued what she was doing, carefully tucking the soft corner of the baby's blanket with the focused tenderness of a person for whom that simple act was the most important thing in the universe. Only then did she raise her eyes to meet his. Ethan Sterling had entered every room in his life assuming it belonged to him, but standing in this one, he was acutely aware that he was a trespasser. He had always been able to control the story, to shape reality with his own compelling vision, but standing in the doorway of their penthouse in Pacific Heights, watching his wife near the window with a packed bag by her side, he had no story left to tell. No vision could be sold, no control asserted. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed him. He tried again. Maya. Her name is Lily, Maya said softly, turning away from the city lights. I saw the blueprints for the house in Big Sur. Something in his polished composure didn't just crack, it disintegrated. It wasn't the fury of a man caught in a simple lie, but the quiet, devastating implosion of an architect who finally recognizes a fatal flaw in his own foundation and knows it's far too late for a retrofit. I never wanted you to find out that way, he whispered. I know, Maya said. That was never the point. She looked straight at him, her eyes free of the tears that had fallen hours earlier. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, sharp calm she hadn't felt in years. The point, she said, is that there shouldn't have been anything to find out. Who I am, the mother of your child, shouldn't have been a liability you had to build a second life to escape from. I deserved your respect, Ethan. You owed me that because I am your wife, because I was carrying our daughter, because I am a human being who was navigating the most vulnerable time of her life, and you were supposed to be the one person I could lean on. He had no answer for that. No architecture could defend it. It was simply the brutal, unadorned truth. You can see her, Maya said, her voice now quiet. Lily deserves a father, but Ethan, she also deserves to grow up watching what a woman who knows her own worth does. And frankly, so do I. Ethan looked at his daughter, Lily. He stared at the infant's perfect, sleeping face, and for a fleeting second, the hospital room settled into something that felt like calm. Good night, Olivia said, and Liam Kavanaugh walked to the door, rode the elevator down to the main floor, and stood in the sterile silence, convinced he finally grasped the full magnitude of what he had destroyed. He was wrong. He didn't have a clue. At 2:14 in the morning, Serena Vance sat in the plush backseat of a black car 6 blocks from the Chicago Medical Center, and she made a phone call that would shatter what remained of the evening's fragile quiet and ignite something far larger and more destructive than anything that had happened inside that maternity suite. The call went to a man named Marcus Thorne, 41 years old, a public relations consultant who specialized in the gray area between reputation management and online demolition. He was the type of fixer who understood that in the modern battle for narrative control, the first story that breaks becomes the truth, regardless of the facts. Marcus, Serena said, I've got a project for you, and the compensation will be significantly higher than your standard fee. By 3:30 that morning, the story was written. By 4:15, it was strategically leaked to 3 influential food blogs. By 5, it was a trending topic. The headline was merciless. Celebrity chef's pregnancy rage. Olivia Kavanaugh terrorizes staff ahead of restaurant launch. The narrative was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. Olivia was portrayed not as the victim, not as a woman 9 months pregnant discovering her husband's affair, but as a volatile, entitled chef who manufactured a crisis to sabotage a talented young architect's career, her husband's own colleague. Serena was positioned as the blameless party, a dedicated architect suffering from stress-induced migraines who was verbally abused and humiliated by a possessive wife in a fit of jealousy. The articles quoted unnamed sources from inside the restaurant. They described Serena's migraine as a debilitating condition that Olivia callously dismissed. It painted the arrival of Olivia's restaurant manager, Ben, as an attempt to physically intimidate a guest. It never mentioned the affair, never mentioned the betrayal, nothing about the truth. By 6 a.m, Olivia's name, her face pulled from old culinary school publications, her father's charity, the new restaurants she had poured her soul into, it was all public domain. The private life Olivia had so carefully protected, the separation between her work and her home that she cherished, was erased by one viral story. Ben woke Olivia at 6:20 with the news. She was in her own bed, their daughter, Ava, asleep in the bassinet next to her, the Chicago skyline just beginning to emerge from the dawn. She looked at the phone Ben handed her. She read the headline. She read the first few paragraphs. And for the first time that night, a different sort of pain carved itself onto her face. Not the physical pain of labor, not the sharp sting of a broken heart, but the slow burn of public humiliation. The profound violation of having your story stolen, rewritten by a stranger, and twisted to make you the villain in your own tragedy. In this era, friends, your identity can be dismantled and rebuilt in less than an hour. The only defense you have is the truth, documented, time-stamped, and ready for deployment. If you ever find yourself in a situation where the narrative can be used against you, start recording everything immediately, now. Olivia set the phone down. She looked at Ava. She looked out at the city. Then she met Ben's gaze. "What's our countermove?" she asked. Ben opened his laptop. "Everything," he said. The security logs from their apartment building showing every one of Liam's late-night returns and early departures for the past 6 months, all time-stamped. The credit card statements showing Serena's expensive new laptop was bought by Liam just last week. The phone records, the private car service receipts, the hotel folios from his business trips that he claimed were solo ventures, and, he added, clicking on one last file, the recovered audio logs from their shared cloud account between Liam's mother, Eleanor Kavanaugh, and Serena, confirming she arrived at their apartment 45 minutes before Liam did and was waiting for him. She was part of it. Olivia stared at that final piece of the puzzle for a very long time. "She was part of it," Olivia repeated. Ben nodded. "She knew he was bringing you that gift tonight. She knew the affair was happening. She helped them coordinate their stories. The betrayal wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a planned deception." Olivia closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When they opened, they were sharp and focused. "What else?" she asked. Ben paused. "There's more," he said, "but maybe you should try to get some sleep." "I don't want to sleep," Olivia said. "I want to know everything." What Ben showed Olivia over the next 40 minutes in the master bedroom of their Lincoln Park apartment, while Ava slept and the city came to life. And the false narrative spread like a virus online was not a single truth. It was an archaeological dig, uncovering layer after layer of a carefully constructed lie. Each discovery went deeper than the last, revealing a hidden framework of deceit that Olivia had sensed for months but could never definitively prove was real. Ben started with Eleanor. When the restaurant security software flagged the first anonymous blog comments, Ben had initiated a deep background check on all communications involving the Kavanaugh family for the past 18 months. It was a protocol he'd set up as a precaution. What the search revealed was not a recent affair, it was a long-term campaign. Eleanor Kavanaugh had been in communication with a man named Robert Vance for over a year. Robert Vance was 68 years old, the retired founder of Vance Construction, and 15 years ago, he had tried a hostile bid for Olivia's father's real estate company. It was a move her father had defeated so decisively, so publicly, that Robert Vance had spent the next decade and a half consumed by a bitterness that had curdled into a cold, methodical, and profoundly dangerous obsession. Eleanor's messages with Robert, pulled from encrypted chats by a cybersecurity expert, revealed a plan that was far from accidental. Robert had been advising Eleanor on how to position Liam for a messy divorce, one that would paint Olivia as unstable and give Liam the best shot at her assets, including the restaurant. Eleanor had been feeding Robert a steady stream of private information about Olivia's life, her stress levels, her pregnancy anxieties, compiling a dossier that could be used to argue she was emotionally unfit, exactly as the blogs were now claiming. The affair with Serena wasn't a mistake, Ben said. It was a deployment. Olivia stared at him. Deployment? She repeated. Ben turned the laptop screen toward her. Serena Miller, he said, born Serena Vance, Robert Vance's daughter. The room was utterly still. Serena was introduced into Liam's architecture firm. It began 10 months ago at a political fundraiser in a lavish Beacon Hill ballroom, a carefully orchestrated introduction. The entire affair had been a performance, meticulously staged with a singular purpose: to detonate her marriage, to engineer a public humiliation that would give the O'Malley family a political advantage, and to cast Julian as the heartbroken husband when the truth about her family's political influence finally came to light. Nora stood frozen in her study. She looked at the silver frame photograph of her grandmother on the mantelpiece, the woman who had been a trailblazing city councilwoman for decades, the woman who had soundly defeated Declan O'Malley in the election 30 years ago, the woman who told her that integrity was the only legacy that could never be stolen. Julian wasn't the mastermind, Nora thought, her voice a hollow echo in the quiet room. He was just the stage. Her mentor, Professor Albright, simply nodded. He was the stage. Always follow the evidence, dear readers. If someone's affections feel too perfect, if every apology, every thoughtful gift, every little drama seems to steer you toward a predictable conclusion, you're not imagining things. You're seeing the script, and every script has a writer. But this play had one more act to go. Because Robert Vance, emboldened by the very smear campaign he had bankrolled, now had the public smokescreen he needed to make his primary assault. He moved with stunning speed. At 8:30 that morning, less than 6 hours after Serena's call to the PR fixer, Robert Vance's lawyers filed a formal motion to invalidate the prenuptial agreement between Liam and Olivia. The legal argument was intricate, malicious, and built for maximum damage. The prenup, they claimed, was fundamentally coercive. Olivia's father, they alleged, had pressured Liam into signing it when he was young and financially vulnerable. The entire agreement, their motion argued, was therefore void, and as part of that motion, Vance's lawyers submitted a petition for an emergency custody hearing for Ava, this time with a far more insidious angle. The logic was simple and cruel. If the prenup was void, Olivia's assets, including her seed money for the restaurant, became marital property. And the fraudulent concealment of these assets, combined with her documented emotional instability, was grounds to declare her an unfit mother. Olivia was facing the loss of everything: her reputation, her child, and her freedom. All because she had trusted a man who was never on her side to begin with. And because Julian's family had, in their ambition, allied themselves with her own family's oldest political rivals, this was the instant Nora's world caved in. She sat in the leather chair of her home library, her newborn, Chloe, asleep in the nearby cradle, the lights of Boston sprawling like a web of jewels below. For the first time in days, her iron self-control finally fractured. She was adrift in terror. She reached for a worn copy of a book her old professor had written, remembering the inscription inside. You build arguments so solid that other people's lies become the foundation of their own ruin. He ever made. Nora closed the book. She looked at Professor Albright. I need Leo, she said. and I need every piece of correspondence from the city archives related to the O'Malley family for the last 50 years. For the first time that night, Professor Albright gave a thin, determined smile. "Already being scanned," she replied. Nora Vance didn't seek revenge. She curated history. And what she assembled over the next 3 days from her study, with her infant daughter sleeping beside her and a research assistant who lived on caffeine and loyalty, was not a rebuttal. It was a historical exhibit. Every letter cross-referenced, every property deed mapped, every motivation analyzed. Each piece was chosen not to destroy her enemies, but to make the truth so tangible, so contextualized, and so undeniable that their political collapse was merely the natural conclusion of the story she was telling. Part 1. The Archives. Nora released a single authenticated dossier to a hand-picked group of political historians and members of the city's Preservation Society. No commentary, no spin, just documented history. The scanned love letters from Julian to Sasha, dated and verified. The letters were penned on stationery stolen from Nora's own desk, the watermark clearly visible. The hotel receipts showing Julian's stay with Sasha in Nantucket 2 days before their anniversary. The expense reports, the phone records showing Julian's location when he claimed he was meeting with donors. The visitor logs from Sasha's apartment building showing her carefully timed visits that coincided with Nora's obstetrician appointments. She let the facts tell the story, and they spoke with such force that every political columnist who had lauded Julian's family values campaign spent the next day scrambling to rewrite their narrative. Andrew Pierce, the columnist who had written the most fawning profile, received a formal historical correction from Nora's legal counsel. It wasn't an accusation, just a correction with footnotes so meticulous that his newspaper retracted the column by noon. Part 2. The Legacy Defense. Professor Albright filed a motion with the board of the city's largest charitable foundation, and the historical documents she presented contained a single piece of evidence that stopped the O'Malleys' power grab before it began. 30 years ago, when Declan O'Malley had tried to seize control of the foundation from Nora's grandmother, his own lawyers had conducted a full review of the foundation's original 1922 charter. That same review, filed in a dusty city archive, had concluded in writing that the charter's morality clause was ironclad and legally binding, and that Nora's grandmother was the sole protector of its mission. Declan O'Malley's current claim that the clause was an outdated relic was a direct contradiction of his own legal team's past findings. His own lawyers had already confirmed the power of the very rule he was now trying to break. The foundation's board didn't need much time to deliberate. The motion was dismissed. Declan O'Malley's name was forwarded to the state's Ethics Commission for investigation. Part 3. The Separation. Nora filed on the morning of the third day. The filing was concise, factual, and brutal. It included Julian's private emails with Declan O'Malley, proving he had conspired with his wife's greatest political adversary to sabotage her family's name. It included the evidence of the affair with Sasha. It included the hotel receipts. And it included one more genealogical fact that Professor Albright had been saving for this exact moment. Sasha O'Malley was not just Julian's lover, she was Declan O'Malley's granddaughter. The entire affair had been an act of generational revenge. Declan had sent his own granddaughter to ensnare Julian as part of a long-term plan to infiltrate Nora's family through her marriage. When this connection became public, the shockwave was immediate, not because of the infidelity, not because of the politics, but because the narrative had become something more profound than a failed marriage. It became the story of a brilliant woman constantly dismissed by the men around her, who weathered their condescension with quiet scholarship for years, and who, when the time was right, proved that the person they'd overlooked was the most formidable one in the city. Leo, who had been sifting through microfilm and public records for 72 hours straight, and looked like he'd lived a decade in 3 days, collapsed into a chair in Professor Albright's office after the last document was authenticated and said, "I need to sleep for a week." Professor Albright, reviewing the final petition, said without looking at him, "You're on sabbatical, Leo." He gazed at the ceiling. "I need a full historical blackout." The consequences arrived with the slow, crushing weight of truth. Sasha O'Malley was unmasked. Her bond with Declan became the lead story in the same political circles that had once celebrated her as a sharp, rising political strategist. Her career, which was built on backroom deals, whispered secrets, and the power of being in the know, evaporated in under a week. Declan O'Malley had donors who could forgive ruthless politics. They could not forgive the public revelation that he had weaponized his own granddaughter to settle a 30-year-old grudge. His own party leaders demanded his resignation within a fortnight. His long-held vendetta had cost him his entire legacy. The Political Action Committee that had backed Julian, mostly at his mother's urging, publicly withdrew their support. They recognized a political liability when they saw one. And Julian's mother, Eleanor Vance, who had spent 4 years orchestrating Nora's exclusion from the family, who had sneered at her daughter-in-law's academic career, who had seen herself as the master of a social war so perfectly subtle and vicious that her own children were disgusted when its full extent was revealed, was removed from the board of every family charity by Julian's own siblings. They released a statement through their attorney that was only 2 sentences long, but said it all. Eleanor Vance had not been invited to see her granddaughter. She would not be welcome. And the family portraits in the Beacon Hill home, the ones she had arranged for years with Nora always slightly pushed to the side, were taken down completely. 6 months later, Nora Vance stood in a restored library, not a sterile university archive, not a stuffy reading room with poor lighting and uncomfortable chairs. This space was new. It was bright, the light was warm and natural, the floors were original refinished hardwood, and the chairs that filled the reading nooks were deep, comfortable, and placed with thoughtful intention. Because the woman who had designed the space knew, in a deeply personal way, what it felt like to be forced to sit in a place that was not made for you while trying to do the most important work of your life. The Nora Vance Center for Historical Integrity occupied the entire restored top floor of a historic brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue. Nora had funded it with the endowment established on the day of Chloe's birth. It was not the biggest research center the city had ever seen, but it was the most committed. The center provided grants and resources to female historians whose work was so often ignored. Women who would otherwise research alone in their homes. Women whose partners dismissed their passion. Women who deserved, at the most critical and thrilling moment of their intellectual lives, to be in the right room, to have someone tell them, "Everything you need to find the truth is here." Nora stood in that space with Chloe in her arms, 6 months old now, with her mother's curious eyes and her namesake's promise, and the perfect, simple certainty of a baby, who did not yet understand the history she was born into, but who would one day learn that the building she was in was saved because of it. Professor Albright stood next to Nora, as she had for a decade, with the calm, unwavering presence of a mentor who knew her job was not to give answers, but to support the search, to be the one who answers a 3 a.m. call with, "I've already found it." Leo was there too, trying to get a clear photo of the center's name on the wall, and somehow, the camera flashes caught Liam's smirk in every reflection off the polished concrete floors. His new gallery, Ember, was the talk of Chicago. He'd gone from a nobody to the city's art kingpin in less than a year. His pregnant wife, Sarah, said it was his eye for talent. Liam claimed it was his willingness to hustle, to wine and dine investors until dawn. Both were partially right. Dr. Alistair Finch, Sarah's mentor from the university archive, was there for support. He stood by a monolithic sculpture, debating provenance with a pair of tech moguls, but when he spotted Sarah looking lost in the crowd, he made his way over and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. On Sarah's arm, that same quiet, grounding touch. Some friendships, thankfully, are forged in steel. Her best friend, Ava, a shark from a major law firm on Wacker Drive, was at her side before the first gossip blog had posted the photo. Ava handled everything, deflecting Liam's frantic, guilt-ridden messages with a chillingly calm tone that promised legal annihilation. She guided Sarah through the entire process, building a firewall to protect her heart and her future. Sarah got the brownstone. She hadn't seen Liam's face in 120 days. The separation was executed with brutal efficiency, confounding the high society vultures who had been circling for a dramatic war. Liam contested nothing. He agreed to every term, signed every document, and once the ink was dry, he sent a courier to Sarah's new home with a single package. Inside was a rare, leather-bound copy of a classic novel. Tucked inside was a note. "Forgive me, not for my sin, but for my profound failure of character." Sarah looked at the book. She didn't respond, not because the apology lacked weight, but because it was 9 months too late, and the woman who once cherished his grand literary gestures had been erased that night. Liam was granted supervised visits with their son, Noah. He came every other weekend, a ghost of the man he was, desperately trying to be the father he could never be as a partner. Sarah never interfered. She knew Noah had a right to know the man who gave him his eyes, but she also knew Noah deserved to witness a woman constructing an empire on her own foundation, and she intended to give him a front row seat for the rest of his life. And this, my friends, is the most critical takeaway from her story. The ultimate triumph isn't about tearing something down, it's about building something permanent. It's about curating a legacy so rich with meaning and integrity that the person who dismissed your life as quaint has to read about your monumental success in the history books. That is the kind of achievement they can never touch, not because it's designed to spite them, but because it is built to define you. And that substance, the kind that comes from unearthing your own truth and refusing to let anyone else edit your story, is the one artifact no one can ever steal from your collection. Sarah surveyed the grand hall, at the historians cataloging the final exhibits, at the display cases that were perfectly lit to make every forgotten story feel epic and important. She glanced up at the bronze plaque above the main entrance, the Noah Collection. It was the realization of a passion she had almost shelved forever. She hugged her son a little closer, breathed in the scent of old paper and wood polish, and stepped into the center of the museum wing she curated, into the legacy she had unearthed, into the future she had once mapped out on a dusty index card in a university library. She didn't spare a single thought for the past, because no memory behind her could compare to the history she was making. People, you've just heard the tale of a woman who was dismissed, betrayed, and publicly humiliated when she was most vulnerable, who answered not with rage, but with intellect, dedication, and the unstoppable power of someone who finally decided to write her own history. The moral is as clear as it is crucial. Never assume someone's quiet support means they lack ambition. Never believe their careful nature means they lack foresight. And absolutely never use someone's devotion as the pedestal for your own ego. Because you have no idea who they really are, you are blind to the archives they are assembling in their soul, and by the time you see what they've built, it might be the most celebrated museum exhibit of the decade, and you won't even be allowed past the velvet rope. Leave a comment with the most powerful lesson you learned from Sarah's story. What kind of legacy would you have created? And be sure to subscribe for more compelling and inspiring narratives like this. Until next time, curate your own collection, honor your own history, and never let anyone treat you like a footnote in your own biography. This narrative was carefully crafted, developed, and produced by our creators to deliver impactful stories with meaningful lessons. Each character's journey was intentionally designed, and every twist in the plot serves to highlight a message for reflection. We appreciate you being a part of our community.